know a budget's coming. We heard in the speech from the throne that up to 3.5% to 4% of GDP could be spent on stimulus, not COVID-related measures, but stimulus for the economy. That's, could be $100 billion. When you heard that, as we contemplate between now and March, whatever, when we get this date, what do you think the federal government should be thinking about?
Well, what our working group concluded was that they should think very carefully about whether a stimulus is required at this point at all. What we've seen in Canada is a very rapid growth during COVID of savings rates and the slowdown in corporate investment as balance sheets have been improved. So there's a lot of reason to believe that when the restrictions of the pandemic begin to unwind, that both the household and the corporate sectors are going to start to spend some of that cash that's been set aside. And government spending is going to be needed in order to get some economic growth and bring down the unemployment rate and get people back into the workforce.
One of the concerns we've heard expressed is that spending that is related to this emergency, this pandemic, should be temporary. And it shouldn't morph into permanent spending. But better than anyone, I think, that programs like the CERB can kind of just evolve into semi-permanent, and then next thing you know, it's considered a benefit, and a whole bunch of people are receiving it. How do you make sure that there's a clean cutoff and that spending doesn't become permanent that was needed for this pandemic?
You need a very tough finance minister. I can tell you that. I think. My gut instinct is that we have one, but Minister Freeland's going to have to be very clear about what the expectations are and how this is going to unwind. CERB is a good case in point because it has tided people through a time when, unlike the usual employment insurance programs, everything just shut down, and it has stayed shut down more or less for 11 months now. So there's no doubt that a special program was needed, but we've got to get back to normal programs, employment insurance based on attachment to the workforce for a scaled set of benefits that preserves the incentive to resume real work in the employment force of the country.
One of the temptations in a budget, and I think one of the goals, is to outline priorities, is to actually change the agenda a little bit here. What do you think is the best way at this stage of our country's fiscal history that this government can do that? Because $100 billion is an awful lot of money. So let's assume that there's going to be some spending, some stimulus spending. How is it best spent?
Well, the first thing we've got to do is get a handle on the pandemic, and that doesn't just mean get everybody vaccinated. I'm mystified as to why we haven't done more on testing and tracing. It seems to me that rapid, widely deployed testing could very quickly give us the tools to largely open much of the economy. So testing is key, and tracing of infections is key, and then vaccinations is key. So this has to be the primary work of the government over the next number of months as we move through this. And then, as our working group found, investments in productivity enhancements, in improving the ability of the Canadian economy to increase its capacity and to build the jobs of the future, whether it's in digital or other things, is going to be important. So the usual call, not for shovel-ready projects, but for core infrastructure, especially digital infrastructure, is going to be an important part of what governments can do to get us through to the other side of this.
As you note, and you were there when some tough decisions needed to be made, the finance minister has a hard role, and it often runs into, I don't want to say butts heads, but there's tension between what the leader might want to do, what's politically saleable, and what a finance minister believes should happen. We're in this pre-budget period, John. I don't know how much you're on Twitter, but I was surprised on the weekend to see a Twitter survey that came my way asking me what I wanted to see in the federal budget. And as much as I think, obviously this is our government and it's our tax dollars, it doesn't really feel like how a budget should be put together, especially when tough decisions are being made.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't rely heavily on that. You do require leadership. And sometimes leaders are in those jobs and they have to deliver tough messages. Certainly that was the experience that our government went through in the 90s when we had to cut programs, shut down spending, reduce spending, and the message had to be delivered by the Prime Minister, by the Minister of Finance, by other ministers to get us through it. As for, I think Minister Freeland has a lot of political capital at the moment. Quite frankly, based on her most recent mandate letter, I'm hoping that she and the Prime Minister's office are on the same page. She has a new deputy who's come back to government, Michael Sabia, who can begin to restore some of the influence of the finance ministry. But this Prime Minister cannot afford to lose another finance minister. So Ms. Freeland is going to have to be tough with him and say no to some things that he might like to do and face the consequences. And I don't think there will be any.
And obviously, fiscal prudence is something that is hard to manage at a time when there's still a lot of calls on you for spending. Where do you think that goes in the mix? I know the Prime Minister has signaled he'd like to see not just guardrails, but actual targets back. Is that anchors, I should say? Is that enough, or do we need even a roadmap back to balance?
I think, first of all, one of the things our working group called for in one of its first reports was the restoration of a fiscal anchor so that we can actually see where we're going and there's some accountability. I think a roadmap is going to be difficult to draft until we know what the course of the pandemic is going to be. So that's why I would say putting the priority on the pandemic, on getting the testing, tracing, and vaccination pattern into place, acquiring the supplies, using a broad-based approach to distribution. In other words, drawing in the private sector and the not-for-profit sector in order to maximize the ability to have broad-based testing and tracing will be really key. Put all of the possible resources into that. One of the things to remember here, Amanda, it's become tough for governments to actually deliver on the ground. There's nobody really currently at fault for that. It's been a degradation over many years of the capacity of governments to do things. They may be good at policy and setting broad objectives, but actually delivering on the ground is tough. When we're trying to deliver testing and vaccinations, they're going to need to rely on more than the public sector resources to do that effectively and thoroughly.
So that actually fits with the question that was next on my mind, and that is, why is Canada so bad at procurement? And I mean, not just this government and not just vaccines. You can go back through conservative governments and liberal governments. We can talk fighter jets or frigates. We are not good at buying things on time, on budget. Are you saying that we have allowed the public service to degrade to a level where we're just going to be bumbling around? What needs to happen to get us better at this stuff?
Well, I think, first of all, we have to be a little less risk averse. We need to stop, treating people like they are criminals if they've made a mistake or if they paid $1 too much. Sometimes, speed is of the essence, and you need to just get things done and face the consequences. I think that's an important part of it. All of us have experienced that have been in government the risk aversion of the public sector. Sometimes it's just that's the way they are constructed. Sometimes it's that we play up reports of auditors general maybe more than they should be. As they used to say, the auditors are the guys that go out on the battlefield after the battle's over and shoot the wounded. When there's a real emergency that we're dealing with, as is now the case with COVID-19, I'm prepared to let people make a mistake in order to get to the end result.